Well, I'm going to be talking about an interesting subject this morning. You're going to find some of the information maybe a bit controversial. You may find yourself having a reaction or two. I don't care. Because this is the teaching. So I'm going to be talking about Ashrams this morning, in the next couple of weeks as well. So this morning we'll be talking about what is an ashram. An ashram is understood as a center of retreat. So that's the real key definition for us to understand, because ashram is not a term that we read about in the New York Times. You know, we just don't. And if we do, it's usually from a negative point of view, not from a universal or understanding point of view. So this is a really nice definition. It's a center of retreat. It's not the grocery store. It's not the department store. You know, sometimes it's not even home. You know, sometimes it is. Sometimes our homes can be an ashram or a place of retreat. And of course that's a goal that we want to have. Anyway, so an ashram is understood as a center of retreat where we can find ourselves, and that's the rest of the definition, where we can find ourselves. It is spiritual in nature, and it's intended to give us a direction in our life. So here we have an ashram as a place of retreat. It is a place to find ourselves, and it is brings about an opportunity. The environment, the spirituality of the environment brings us an opportunity to have a sense of direction, a life direction. So that's an ashram. If it has a physical location, and the key word is if, okay, if it has a physical location, it's going to be found in a sacred location. I find that interesting. What is a sacred location? It's not easy to find a sacred location anywhere in the world today because of pollution. So we want to find a location that has minimal pollution and is typically found in mountains and forest areas. Most disciples have a vague sense. Now here's one of those controversial statements that may cause you to bristle a little bit. Most disciples have a vague sense of who they are. Well, we would accept this as a teenager. Most teenagers, they don't know who they are, period. You know, they are their friend, they are their anger, they are their this, their that. But as adults, and this goes, if we use the word disciple, that takes us beyond an adult. It takes us into the spiritual realm of light and love and power. And so to hear the words that a disciple has only a vague sense of who they are, a vague sense of their life direction, that's not a bad thing. It's a good thing because it creates discontent. We also have to recognize it and accept it that, okay, I sort of know who I am, but who am I really? See, and that's the question. Then we begin to have a little bit of divine discontent. It's like my son is reading now this book I gave him. My son's comes from a strong Christian background, and I gave him the book 100 Names of God to read. So now every morning we have this time of discussion, let's call it, and it's so exciting to me because now he's questioning who is he. He's questioning what he's been taught, in the past by some of his churches and so forth. And it's like he's having an awakening. It's really, really exciting for me, but it's exciting for him as a soul, as well, because now he's experiencing that discontent, what we call a divine discontent. And that's going to give this sense of restlessness, is going to give him a sense of life direction, which is going to pull, not necessarily him, that's up to him, but this kind of experience, life direction, the sense of restlessness, this sense of divine discontent, particularly if we are a disciple, will eventually pull us toward a magnetic center. And this magnetic center is called the outpost of the subjective ashram. Subjective ashram can be part of our consciousness, part of our thinking process. It can be part of the higher worlds. If this subjective ashram is part of the higher worlds, then we call it the higher ashram. For example, hierarchy. Hierarchy is an ashram. Masters have higher ashrams, in the higher levels of consciousness. The Buddhic plane, intuitional level of consciousness, and higher mind, higher mental plane as well. So eventually our restlessness, our sense of this vague sense of who we are, and that we want to know more about who we are as a soul, draws us to a magnetic center, which can be the outpost, the physical outpost of this subjective ashram. The ashram and its activities will in time help us to fully define ourselves, who we really are, help us to define our life direction, and then put us on a path where we're going to flower into becoming our true self. When a person becomes their true self, that beautiful being of light and love, it is then they can engage in true humanitarian service. This service takes place through the impulse of hierarchy, through the impulse of a master, and so forth. So when we enter into an ashram, we are met with revelation. This is, if you've had the experience, it's no longer, a hypothesis or an idea, it's a reality. That when you enter into an ashram, you are met with revelation. And sometimes that revelation is an experience of different levels of shock. The initial experiential years are not what we expect. We have not entered into a garden of heaven, making us as we first thought. See, this is old age thinking, it's like we're going to die and go to heaven. And so we carry this with us from life to life to life until we enter into an ashram, this sanctuary of light and love and power. And that's when we look into a mirror that says, you're not that, you're this. And that's when the shocks begin. The shocks occur as a result of ashramic energy, this high, fiery Agni energy. So this is a sanctuary, an ashram of greater light, a light which it is not likely that we have experienced before, a light that reveals the weeds in our garden. And I like the word garden because it's the title of the first 2 books of Agni Yoga, The Leaves of Moya's Garden. It will reveal the weeds in our garden. Being affected by such intense, fiery light creates revelations. and creates shocks. It is through these revelations, through these shocks, that we perceive the real condition of our life. When we recognize the real condition of our life, our physical, emotional, mental, spiritual life, see, now we begin to have this sense of where we're going. The life direction. What is life about? What is the purpose of life all about? Now, some people experience this as a form of punishment, but it is not. By keeping in closer contact with an ashram, a person can purify their life, making it really creative so they can cross into the next level of consciousness, into a more lighted consciousness. The cross over to that next level means you must pass through what is called the ring past knot. If you've ever studied astrology, this is a term that's pretty common. Saturn represents one's ring past knot. This is our limitations, our opinions, our bias, our prejudice, our this and that. It's the contents of the subconscious mind. We have to find a way, and to find a way to go through this ring past knot asks that we move to a higher state of beingness. To cross this, let's call it a canal, is very difficult because we are limited by our physical, emotional, and mental circumstances. Also our conditions. Also our beliefs and our disbeliefs, our traditions and our religions. We cannot cross the canal of life because of our limitations and obstacles. So our limitations and obstacles, we can see them from a negative point of view or from the view of an opportunity, but we have to recognize it. We have to recognize that this is a limitation, but it's also a test for us to expand our consciousness. This is a challenge. Or just the opposite. My limitations and challenges make me a victim of this life. So it depends on our attitude. But when we cross this canal, when we go through this ring past knot, we undergo what's called a new birth. There is the ashram of Shambhala, the ashrams of the master, and also a core of a group that with a unified consciousness can become so purified and in harmony with the master and hierarchy that group eventually becomes an ashram. It is so beautiful to see, but it takes a little bit of work. Why work? Well, because the key word here is purification, and the next word is harmony. Purification and harmony is not so easy to attain in today's society. Like we bring CNN with us into class or into our Sunday service, and that chaos, that's taking place certainly in this country of politics, we have to leave it somewhere outside of our mental, body. So it's like this is a kind of a cute experience that I had as a little kid. I played the violin. God bless my parents. If you've ever listened to a little kid playing a screechy violin, it's horrible. Well, I would go into these group classes where there are a lot of little kids and a lot of screechy violins. This is called disharmony at its best, horrible. And on top of that, the violins are manufactured by Walmart, let's say. They're not a Stradivarius quality of wood. So from being that little girl with those scratchy, horrible sounding violins until going to finally reaching college, having a really good violin, really good teachers, now I have an opportunity for what? Purification. We have a pure instrument, a beautiful instrument, still not a Stradivarius, but a much better. In fact, my violin was made by Charles Becker of Chicago, a wonderful violin maker, and he would get his wood from Minnesota, where they have beautiful, beautiful trees. And the purification meant improving, refining, improving a sense of music and how to interpret the masters of composition. So the same holds true for us, that we find the ashram, this instrument of beautiful music, and we have to find a way to align ourselves and attune our instrument to the beauty of the composition of light, love, and power. And that's when we undergo a new birth. In the book Ashrams by Torquem Saradarian, we are told that another definition of ashram is a hut that is built for ceremonial purposes. For example, let us say that Gandhi is going to give a lecture. The people will build a little ashram, or a hut, from which he can sit and speak. So that would also be called an ashram. An ashram, here's another definition, is a sphere of consciousness. A sphere of consciousness, or a field of consciousness. An ashram can be in many places at the same time, without being in any specific earthly locations. So like during Vesak, all the stories that we have read about the great ones gathering in the valley of Vesak. Where is Vesak? And that's, controversial. Some people say it's in the ethers, some people say there's a physical location. It doesn't make any difference. It can be both places. An ashram can be in many places at the same time without being in any specific earthly location. In other words, it is a sphere of consciousness in which people are tuned with one another. Can it be like listening to NPR? I have a lot of music on my computer, like NPR and Sirius XM and Pandora, I think it's called. I'm not there, but I hear the music. I attune myself as I am doing computer stuff to the music that makes my computer stuff much more beautiful and exciting and not so dull and technical. So, it is a sphere of consciousness in which people are tuned with one another. Now, this next point is very exciting, to me anyway. An earthly ashram can be an outpost. An earthly ashram can be an outpost of a master's subjective ashram. So as above, so below. An ashram located in higher states or planes of consciousness is called the higher ashram. The higher ashram is the ashram of a master. Ashrams can be found on the astral plane, the mental plane, and Buddhic planes of consciousness. Many esotericists today believe that the approach of the hierarchy will begin to take place through the earthly ashrams that are coming into form. Such an ashram will find the core of their group having the same frequency where together they are building a sphere of light. They build this sphere of light with their ideas. See how practical this is? It's not fantasy. It sounds like fantasy, and then the practical part comes in to help us understand the reality of it. So we are building a sphere of light with our ideas, with our visions, with our thoughts, with our wisdom. We may be living in very different areas of the world, but they are all living in the same ashram. The ashram is perhaps better understood as a sphere of consciousness where it cannot have a specific location, but it can have a specific location. I'll tell you where in a minute. A building can be called an ashram, but unless a sphere of consciousness is established, it is not an ashram in an esoteric sense. So, in trying to understand this in a more realistic way, look at our own home. We could say our home is an ashram, or our home is a location of chaos. Our home is filled with love and beauty and peace, or I can't wait to go to work this morning because my home is just the opposite of that. If it's the opposite of that, then there's our first challenge. Why is our home filled with ugliness and disharmony and chaos? And why are we ready to run out the door to go to work, for heaven's sakes? Unless we happen to be fortunate enough to love our work. So an ashram is like that. It cannot be an ashram in an esoteric sense without calmness and beauty and harmony and an environment where ideas are coming into manifestation, where visions are just waiting for us to align ourselves with visions given to us by the great ones. From that sphere, the members of an ashram can expand their work, their talents, their creativity, and so forth. In the ashram, people share their consciousness. They share their consciousness. They need only a little preparation, technique, and domination over their physical nature so they can bring the sphere of knowledge into practice and into manifestation. Every leadership group and individual must know the science of participating within an ashram. Why? Because if we are considering an ashram, in this case being an outpost of the higher ashram, we have to know how to create right human relations, how to contribute. Are we going to bring our bias, our opinions, our prejudice, our fears into an ashram, or are we going to bring our talents, our beauty, our wisdom, our creativity, into the ashram? Which is it going to be? Because that ashram, the physical outpost, will be receiving energy, enthusiasm. So we come dragging into class, saying, "Oh my God, I could have stayed home tonight, and watched television," or just blanked out. But what happens? You come into the class, and you're energized. I used to do that with the violin. At that time when I was playing the violin, I was a mother of two little ones and working full time. And then I would go to my next job, which was playing the violin, and in some orchestras. And I'll tell you, by the time it was 6:30 and I had to go to that rehearsal, I could have just thrown the kids in bed and myself as well. But when I went into that that auditorium, I can still hear it in my head. It's like all the instruments are tuning up, getting ready for rehearsal. That's the first memory. They're tuning themselves up. So it's like we come in here in the morning or Sunday morning or in for a class or back home from work. We begin to tune ourselves, our instrument, see, with the keynote, which is who we are. Now we recognize we're no longer vaguely knowing who we are. We know who we are, and we are tuning ourselves. So by the time I sat down and got the violin tuned, I'm ready to go. I'm re-energized. And that's what the ashram will do, a retreat will do for us. And this is how groups must work. We are really clean. If we are really clean from our past mess and glamours and illusions and vanities and so forth, we can contribute to a vision that eventually attracts so many rays from various spheres that it becomes a fulcrum of energies, and our vision becomes actualized. This also works in our personal life. You can create and see what comes to you, and this is how God works. You can create your ideas, your visions, and they begin to manifest. And this is what it means, how God works. See, it no longer stays in the ethers. It now comes into manifestation. An ashram is a sphere for the orchestration of different rays, such as physical, emotional, mental rays, soul rays, and so forth. If these rays are not pure, but are contaminated with emotions and glamours and illusions, they're going to be in constant conflict. Conflict within ourselves and within the group. An ashram is a sphere of consciousness in which the orchestration of the ray takes place so that no one loses their identity or character but contributes to the whole beauty. See, have you ever had the experience where you're with a group of people and you're laughing and having fun and, you know, it's just a great gathering, and then some old grumpy person comes in? You're either going to exit them out, or the whole group just stops laughing, stops enjoying themselves, and pretty soon, and usually quickly, disperses. This is why it is not so easy to enter into the ashram, even though the disciple is intuitively pulled toward the ashram, which is his soul group. It is rarely an easy experience for the first few or dozen years. For some, it is more easy than others. It depends on, where their consciousness is. It all depends on your integration, your purification, and your alignment. So like a musician, gosh, this is so musical this morning, I can't believe it. Like a musician, we can put our instrument into good order, but we must put it in tune. If the strings of our instrument are out of tune, it's like that little girl that was playing that really Walmart-made violin with all the other Walmart violins and little kids that had no ear for music whatsoever. Did you get the picture? So I keep saying, I tell my mom and dad still, even though they're not here anymore, thank you for putting up with that noise. If the strings of our instrument are out of tune, we will not play harmonious music, but disruptive discord and chaos. The ashram comes into existence if the people eventually grow up and unite and present the synthesis of the ashram. Every esoteric group is a miniature ashram. If the members conflict and push and pull and hurt each other, there could be no orchestration of the rays. I said earlier that an ashram is revelation and offers the disciple a sphere of shocks. For example, if you enter into a ray, one ashram, it shocks and shatters. You see the vanity and futility of your dreams and actions and plans. Coming into realization, you see that you are a spiritual skeleton. Shocks awaken us to reality, to who we really are. Does that make sense? Okay, all right, good. It is said in certain esoteric teachings that until we receive a shock, we will still dream within the cloud of our glamours and vanities and so forth, unable to awaken. So a shock is a revelation. An ashram is a bridge toward a breakthrough to the next level of consciousness. So we could say ashrams are our compass. Without them, we cannot find the right direction in life. Now keep in mind what I'm saying, all these definitions of what an ashram is. Ashrams exist and we exist. Knowing that ashrams exists makes it possible for us to strive to make contact with them. An ashram can be a hermitage in the mountains where people go and retreat to find themselves, and in finding themselves become of great service to humanity and the plan of hierarchy. It is a place where we can go for the sole purpose of meeting ourselves, questioning ourselves, and sincerely examining ourselves. You know, sometimes as young people, we didn't have the time to do that. We were a mom, we were a dad, we had children to raise, a job to take care of those kids, get them to college, and so on and so forth. But still, during that time, there's something in us that has that yearning, or maybe that divine discontent, that we reach a point where there's got to be more than this. We're thinking there's got to be more than this. Sometimes, and I'm excited about this, young people, contrary to my generation, young people are not getting married so young these days. So they have more time to ask themselves these questions. And they're finding the teaching. It's not that they understand the words and the definitions, it's the feeling. It's the feeling of the teaching. It's like I sent a bracelet to a 22-year-old a few days ago. Beautiful, beautiful young lady that's waking up. And the bracelet had a Buddhist symbol on it. Well, she doesn't know Buddhism at all. But the symbol is what really got her. And she's so excited to have it. And she's showing everybody. And it's all over Facebook. Look at what I have. It's significant to her because of the symbolism, which is the symbolism of the piece of jewelry I gave her was power and protection. Only 22 years old. So that receiving that gift was for her a shock into what she can become. Not what she is today, but what she can become. So ashrams are our compass. Let me repeat this. It is a place where we can go for the sole purpose of meeting ourselves, questioning ourselves, and sincerely examining ourselves. We must go through this process in order to find our higher self. When we find our higher self, great transformation comes into being. Every contact with our higher self transforms us and gives us this sense of direction. Now, the teaching lists 4 stages to become an ashrami. Now, this is not a word that, that we think about every day. Am I an ashrami? No, I don't think that word at all, but it's a word in the teaching. And what I can say, using a word that perhaps is more common to my own thinking, is a practitioner. But ashrami goes with the title of today's talk, building an ashram. So how to become an ashrami? How to become a practitioner. There's 4 stages. The first stage is when you prepare yourself for future and greater contacts with ashrams by studying all that you can. So this can be in this incarnation, it can be in earlier incarnations, it may be an incarnation for your future, but at some point we want to begin to study all that we can in the field of science and politics and physics and chemistry and psychology and religion and philosophy. Everything possible to expand our knowledge so that we are informed. It is imperative that every ashrami has a foundation. So the first step is scientific knowledge, education, university, and higher educations, whatever we can do in whatever field of interest that we have. We must be a perpetual student. The second stage is after reaching a certain degree of knowledge and professional dignity, we're going to marry and become a householder. Marriage is on a path. It's called a school. The process of marrying, living with another person for a while, having children and bringing them up, and all the problems and challenges associated with this process teaches us what life is. Marriage is a university in which a person pays his karmic debts. This is why the Dalai Lama has said, marriage is so difficult. I was so surprised, and he said other things that I'm not going to go into, but I was kind of surprised to hear his attitude about marriage, but this is why. It is a university. It is a place where we can pay our karmic debts to the world and obtain at least an elementary understanding of what the relationship is between a male and female. The secret of this relationship is how to develop this relationship into the highest expression of unity and harmony and understanding. That's the second stage. In the third stage, you must anchor yourself. In anchoring yourself, you become an anchorite instead of an ascetic. For religious purposes, for spiritual dignity and understanding, there is something in you that now wants to be alone. You fix your mind totally on self-development. You are concentrated, you're dedicated and devoted, and totally absorbed in the path. It's important for me anyway to remind you that I'm talking about not just one lifetime. And this is why when I recognized a person that was in the group for a while, they were in the group for about 15 years. The first day I was introduced to this person, I recognized they were from a monk. They were a monk from another lifetime. Total recluse, antisocial, very difficult to have any conversation with, very puritanical. And I did my best to bring them back into America. This is Walmart over here. This is Target over here. This is the life that you are in now. How can you take your sense of being that anchorite or an aesthetic into this particular life? Well, they didn't quite make it. They kind of lost their balance, but this is why we have an ashram. This is why we have a teacher. And we can take advantage of the ashram. We can take advantage of the teacher that says, wait a minute, you need to go to a movie once in a while. See? Because this is where life is right now. We're no longer a Smith Corona typewriter. We're Microsoft Word 365. Anyway, you're getting my point, hopefully. In the fourth stage, we abandon all worldly concerns and dedicate ourselves to the service of humanity, to the service of bringing in light and love and beauty and harmony and understanding between all nations, all religions, races, and creeds. We become a bridge between light and darkness. And we surely are in times now in the world where we need more bridges of light and dark, a bridge between light and darkness. So that's the 4 stages. So ashrams are also defined as colleges or universities where the science of life is taught. And let me close with this. The teaching tells us that there were once a lot of ashrams in Egypt, but they moved out. These ashrams moved out. They have totally moved out of Afghanistan and the Middle East because of tension and killing and other polluting conditions there. This is why I said in the beginning, that ashrams are typically found in low-level pollution places in mountains and pine trees. Ashrams exist in good locations that are favorable for universal and cosmic support. There are some very sacred locations in the United States, but they must be discovered. There have been some in the northern locations, in certain forests of the Rocky Mountains, and in the western United States. So once a person comes in contact with an ashram, they become an outpost of ashramic consciousness. They become an ashrami. But just don't tell your clerk at the grocery store you're an ashrami. Okay? So I think I'll end with that. So hopefully you have a good solid understanding now of what an ashram is.